بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I welcome you all to the second session on how to read a book. In this workshop, we're covering the essential principles of reading a book, how to properly read a book, how to gain maximum benefit from reading a book. And in the previous session, we talked about what reading really is, how a reader should view the act of reading. We talked about the goals of reading, what the goals of reading are, why do we read, and we spoke about the levels of reading. Today, we're going to start going deep into the different levels of reading, and we're going to discuss two of the levels of reading. The first two, there are a total of four. The first two, elementary reading and inspectional reading. Now, the goal was in the second session to discuss all four levels, but analytical reading has a lot of uh, things that come under it. So we're going to dedicate the third session, which is going to be tomorrow. We will talk about analytical reading, and we will talk about how we should read stories and how we should read fictional literature. And then we're going to have a fourth session in which we're going to talk about syntopical reading, inshallah. Um, so originally the plan was to have three sessions, but we will probably end up having to discuss a lot that we're able to digest and we're able to implement. So in today's session, we're going to talk, number one, about these two types of reading in more detail. And we're going to talk about some general habits which a reader should adopt, inshallah ta'ala. So it's going to be this particular session is going to be filled with practical advice for students of the ALP, the Arabic Literature Program, and that makes it a very, very important session. Another point that I want to make is that a lot of a lot of the students who have joined the ALP, they have joined in Arabic. Okay, some of the students are advanced, so they're already beyond the stage of elementary reading. Now, elementary reading, it has a very specific meaning, right? When we say elementary reading, we are using it with a particular meaning, which I'm going to, inshallah ta'ala, mention. It doesn't mean, just just reading like kids' books. That's not what we mean by elementary reading. That's a part of it, but it goes beyond that level as well. So a lot of those who have joined this program, they really want to master the elementary reading of Arabic. So this session is very relevant. All the sessions are relevant, but this session is the most relevant session to the students of the ALP from Kalila wa Dimna. And inshallah ta'ala, in tomorrow's session, when we discuss analytical reading, we're going to talk about how to use dictionaries as well, because Adler discusses that as part of an analytical reading. And that's beneficial as well for, of course, the ALP students. Of course, some of the students who have joined the ALP, they're advanced readers. So for them, the next session, which is going to be on analytical reading, that is going to be very, very important. Those who have already mastered elementary reading, they would want to read Kalila wa Dimna in a more analytical style, inshallah. all of this is going to make sense once, inshallah ta'ala, you've gone through this workshop, bi'idhnillah al-kareem. Yesterday, we just, yesterday was more of a warm-up. Today, we're really getting into, inshallah ta'ala, the real stuff now. So, Adler says at one point, and this is perhaps one of my favorite quotes from the book. He says, there is nothing arcane or even really new about what we have to propose. It is largely common sense. Okay. A lot of what Adler is going to mention, right? A lot of the techniques that he's going to mention as part of inspectional reading and as part of analytical reading and syntopical reading, you find that a lot of good readers, they do that naturally. You will find that a lot of good readers, they do those things naturally. So it's not like what we're getting to know is like completely unknown. Some of these techniques, you're probably already using them. But this is sort of going to give a structure to how you use those techniques. And it's going to help you figure out whether the techniques that you're using, are they the best techniques, enhance your experience when you're reading, and so on and so forth. So let's start with elementary reading. Now, according to Adler, just a quick confirmation, Brother Hasib, I'm audible, you can hear me clearly, correct?
Yeah, I can hear you. You break up a little bit here and there, but you're good for now.
Brother Hasib, alhamdulillah, Jayed, alhamdulillah. Okay, so elementary reading, what Adler really means by elementary reading is the reading that you learn from preschool all the way till like junior high school or 10th grade, in essence. The kind of reading that is learned during your high school days, or for the most of your schooling years, right? That's what Adler calls elementary reading. And so stage one, there are a total of 4 stages of elementary reading. The first stage is what is called reading readiness. That is when, you essentially become ready to, start learning how to read. And, the time for this phase is from birth till the age of 6 or 7. But of course, it also depends on individual children and their own aptitude as to when they're ready to learn how to read. Okay, and of course, at this stage, they start learning how to read, with their ABCs, with their phonics lessons, and so on and so forth. But this is the first stage, which of course all of us have gone through, alhamdulillah, the preschool and kindergarten phase, where we learned our ABCs, we learned the phonetic system of English, and of course of Arabic as well. Every student that has joined the ALP program is already comfortable with reading Arabic, with letter recognition and word recognition. At best, the only problem that any student is facing is with the meanings of words. So that's stage 1 of elementary reading. Stage 2 of elementary reading is word mastery. And this is when a student gains what we call first grade literacy. This is what you learn in the first grade, right? They start learning words, especially they start with sight words, right? And it, and so on and so forth. They start developing a sense of context and meaning clues. They're able to read simple works easily, right? So very simple works. You might find at this stage that a child is reading some of the simpler works of Roald Dahl, for example, or often of Dr. Seuss type works, right? those kind of works. That's what a student would be reading, like the cat in the hat, and that sort of a thing. But this is where, you know, they start building that vocabulary bank as well, and they're now able to read simple works easily. Um, an important thing which Adler mentions, he says, it is incidentally worth observing that something quite mysterious, almost magical, occurs during the stage of development. The child, when faced with a series of symbols on a page, finds them quite meaningless. Not much later, perhaps only 2 or 3 weeks later, he has discovered meaning in them. He knows that they say the cat sat on the hat. And he calls it he calls it the most brilliant feat of the human mind. He says, this feat, you know, most children are performing them when they're at the age of 7. It's like the symbols that they started to read with the ABCs, they were completely meaningless. And now, you know, within a very short period of time, sometimes within 2 or 3 weeks, they have this, you know, they have discovered meaning in them. So the stage 2 is basically first grade literacy. Alhamdulillah, we're beyond that with Arabic as well. Stage 3 is vocabulary growth and the utilization of context. And this is what is known as functional literacy. After 4th grade, you know, the kind of literacy that you've gained, functional literacy, it essentially means that, you know, if you were given like a basic form to fill, you'd be able to do that. You can function in the society. That's why it's called functional literacy. So at this stage, there is rapid progress in vocabulary building. Uh, People start to unlock meaning through context at this stage, right? So even though they might not know what the word exactly means, they're able to unlock the meaning just through the context. And children at this stage learn to read for different purposes and for different subjects. Science, history, civics, or social studies, and so on and so forth. So they start reading for different purposes and for different subjects. All right. Now, I'd say that some of us might be at stage 3, right? Some of us might be at stage 3 of elementary reading when it comes to Arabic. All right. And in that case, you need to use Kalila wa Dimna and our further readings, inshallah ta'ala, to go beyond this stage, right? To move on to stage 4 and then eventually to master elementary reading, right? I've chosen works which are versatile, works which can work for those who are beginners. They can work for intermediate students as well and for advanced students as well, right? Because these are classics, right? So anyone who's trying to learn Arabic, they can learn Arabic through the classics. If someone is an advanced student of the Arabic language, they already know how to read, they can still enjoy reading a classic. They can still learn how to read analytically, for example, right? So the goal is not for everyone to read analytically. The goal is for you to see where do you fall on the map, right? Are you at one of the elementary stages or are you beyond that? If you're beyond the elementary stages, right, you will still follow the rubric which we've laid down, right? Which is mentioned in the reading guide. But the techniques that you use to read, they're going to be based on your own level, right? The best way to conduct this course, because if it was conducted in a class where every single word was being read and translated, then we'd have to specify one particular level. But now, through this workshop, you can understand where you fall in each of the levels, and then you can utilize the techniques based on that, of course, to read and to grow as a reader. So some of us might fall in the stage 3 category of vocabulary growth and the utilization of context. We're still trying to develop functional literacy in Arabic. And so a work like Kalila wa Dimna will be very helpful for you to build your vocabulary, for you to progress in unlocking meaning through context, inshallah ta'ala. And the kind of vocabulary you will learn, it will help you to read for different purposes, inshallah ta'ala. The final stage of elementary reading, which is when a reader, quote unquote, becomes a mature reader. And this is by the end of elementary school, or by the end of junior high. This is also referred to as 8th grade, 9th grade, or 10th grade literacy. All right. Generally, you will find that after eighth grade, difficult. The topics vary. The topics might become more difficult, but the language sort of, it doesn't get more difficult than that, generally speaking, right? So students, for example, in many schools by 8th grade, they're reading Sherlock Holmes, they're reading other novels, right? They're reading Shakespeare as well. And even in 9th and 10th grade, they're still reading Shakespeare. So the language sort of remains the same at school, but the topics, of course, change. The difficulty of the topics might vary, and so on and so forth. In this stage, the end of elementary school, junior high, that's when a student is refining and enhancing their previous skills. So in essence, they've gained the essential skills by stage 3, and now they're refining and enhancing those skills in stage 4. So and I believe that a lot of us, they are at stage 4 of elementary reading when it comes to Arabic. So Adler says, above all, the student begins to be able to assimilate his reading experiences. That is, to carry over concepts from one piece of writing to another and to compare the views of different writers on the same subject. The child is a quote unquote mature reader in the sense that he is now capable of reading almost anything, but still in a relatively unsophisticated manner. In the simplest terms, he is mature enough to do high school work. However, he is not yet a mature reader in the sense in which we want to employ the term in this book. He has mastered the first level of reading, that is all. He can read on his own and is prepared to learn more about reading, but he does not yet know how to read beyond the elementary level. So you do become a mature reader, but not what Adler intends with the word mature. Okay, for him, a mature reader can read beyond the elementary level. A real mature reader can read at the analytical level. So by the end of, once a person has mastered elementary reading, they are now able to read newspapers. They're able to read something like, Stephen King, someone like Stephen King, with ease, as Susan Weiss Bauer says in her book, The Well-Educated Mind. That by the end of the elementary level, but by the end of high school, but by the end of junior high, a student is able to read newspapers and Stephen King with ease. But she also says you aren't really reading. And what she means by that is that real reading is when you can actually read the great books and digest them, read them properly, be able to discuss them, and so on and so forth. Now, tips for getting better as an elementary reader, right? Of course, you improve your vocabulary through reading as you read, right? Sometimes you also have these crash courses in vocabulary. There's some in English, for example. Susan Weiss Bauer recommends some of them, of course, for English readers. But reading a work like Kalila wa Dimna, for example, is a great thing that that an elementary reader can do to increase their to improve their vocabulary, to add to their vocabulary bank. Another very important tip, which is going to be continuously emphasized throughout these sessions, is using your fingers to read, and also using your fingers to dictate how fast or how slow or how slowly you read something, right? Adler really emphasizes this. Susan Weisbauer in her book emphasizes this. Using a pen as your finger or your finger itself, you know, over the lines, moving them over the lines as you're reading, as a guide for your eyes. That helps you improve your speed. It helps to improve your concentration, and therefore it helps you understand better as well. Now, I've mentioned a note here. Those students of the ALP who are still working on becoming better elementary readers, their goal from reading Kalila wa Dimna should be to build a strong vocabulary bank mainly. They should not be concerned with an analytical reading of Kalila wa Dimna. Advanced students, on the other hand, should read Kalila wa Dimna analytically. Okay, this is very important. Like I said, we have students who are beginners, who are intermediate students, advanced students, and everyone. And we're having these sessions so that you can actually put yourself on the map. You can see, okay, where do I fall in these levels and stages? And then you choose how you read and what your main goal is going to be from that reading. So for those who are at stage 3 of elementary reading, or stage 4 of elementary reading, your main goal is going to be, enhancing your vocabulary, refining your reading skills, learning how to decipher meanings through context, and so on and so forth. Your goal should not be to employ those techniques of analytical reading, which we're going to talk about tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, and we're going to, by the end of this session, we're going to talk about some general habits which every reader should have. All right. Inspectional reading. Now, so we're done with elementary reading. We've understood what elementary reading is. Now let's talk about inspectional reading. Adler calls it a true level of reading. And the impression is that inspectional reading, and analytical reading, and syntopical reading, these are the true levels of reading. And the book, I mean, his book is mainly focused on analytical reading because he himself was very interested in philosophy and the classics and so on and so forth. So for him, the idea is that you're not just reading for gaining information. You're reading to learn the truth. You're reading to discuss. You're reading to agree or disagree with the author, right? And that's what analytical reading involves. By the end of analytical reading, you either agree or disagree with the author. You decide whether what the author is saying is true or not. You decide whether the book is a significant work or not. Has it enlightened you in any way or not? You discuss with the author by, writing down on the book, writing questions, writing, remarks and rebuttals, for example. The analytical reading involves that sort of rigorous reading. Okay. So in that sense, Adler calls that a true level of reading. But even when you're reading at an elementary level, of course, once you're able to read at the elementary level, only then can you, move on to the analytical level. And as Adler said, the higher levels contain within them the lower levels. So someone who is reading analytically is also going to be utilizing whatever they learned in the phase of elementary reading, and they're also going to be utilizing inspectional reading techniques. Only then will they be able to read analytically. Okay, and so on and so forth. So inspectional reading now inspectional reading, it mainly involves two activities. Okay, inspectional reading mainly involves two activities. Okay, and you do inspectional reading once you've become comfortable with elementary reading. Okay. The first activity of inspectional reading is skimming, systematic skimming, or pre-reading. And this should take only a few minutes and should not take more than an hour. It should take only a few minutes and should not take more than an hour. Okay? The main aim of the activity one of an inspectional reading is to discover whether the book requires a more careful reading or not. That's the main aim of the first activity of inspectional reading. Now, there are many books. Okay, there are many books, and not every book is worth reading. Not every book is going to be relevant to what you're researching, for example. So activity one of inspectional reading helps you figure this out, right? Does this book deserve a more detailed read or not? And Adler says giving a book this kind of a quick once over is a threshing process that helps you to separate the chaff from the real kernels of nourishment. There are a total of 6 steps for activity one. In step one, you look at the title page, if the book has one, and its preface. So you look at the title page, and you look at the preface of the book. I'm going to go back to Adler's book here so that we can read a bit more about these steps here. You can view the screen, inshallah. Okay, so the first step of activity one of inspectional reading is look at the title page, and if the book has one, at its preface. So look at the title page, look at its preface. Read each quickly. Note especially the subtitles or other indications of the scope or aim of the book, or of the author's special angle on his subject. Before completing this step, you should have a good idea of the subject, and if you wish, you may pause for a moment to place the book in the appropriate category in your mind. What pigeonhole that already contains other books does this one belong in? So the first step is mainly for pigeonholing a book, classifying it, seeing which category it lies in, what is the subject of the book. Step 2, study the table of contents to obtain a general sense of the book's structure. Now that you know what the subject of the book is, you want to figure out the structure of the book. So for example, you go to the bookstore, you pick up the book Qatr al-Nada in Arabic grammar. Now, Qatr al-Nada, literally, the title itself says nothing about the grammar. But when you read the introduction, the preface, you'll know that this book is about Arabic grammar. It's written by Ibn Hisham al-Ansari rahimahullah. So once you've read the title page, you've read the preface, the introduction, any subtitles, any indications, you'll be able to classify this book as a book of Arabic grammar. Step 2, you study the table of contents to obtain a general sense of the book's structure, right? So different grammar works have different structures. Alfiyat ibn Malik has a particular structure. Ajurumiyya has a particular structure. And so different books have different structures. All right. Sister Sophia, yeah, barakallah fiki, that's fine, inshallah ta'ala. So, study the table of contents to obtain a general sense of the book's structure. Use it as you would a roadmap before taking a trip. So, you're going to use the table of contents as a roadmap for your reading. He says, it is astonishing how many people never even glance at a book's table of contents unless they wish to look something up in it. All right. So the table of contents is going to be your roadmap, and it's absolutely essential that you read the table of contents of a book. Number 3, check the index if the book has one. So most expository works, they do have an index. Make a quick estimate of the range of topics covered and of the kinds of books and authors referred to. So again, this is going to give you a better idea about the contents of the book. Uh, it will give you a sense of a map as well, like the table of contents. You will recognize as crucial some terms that have already been discussed, and so on and so forth. Step 4, if the book is a new one with a dust jacket, read the publisher's blurb. Okay. The publishers usually have there's a blurb at the back of the book, with a brief summary of the book's contents. So some people might think that the blurb is just some puffery, but it's not always the case. The blurb can actually give you some very beneficial indications about the main points of the book, right? He says it is not uncommon for authors to try to summarize as accurately as they can the main points in their book. So in the blurb, you can get a sort of summary of the book. Step 5, which is the second last step, from your general and still rather vague knowledge of the book's contents, look now at the chapters that seem to be pivotal to its argument. If these chapters have summary statements in their opening or closing pages, as they often do, read these statements carefully. So, of course, with step 5, you're familiarizing yourself more with the contents of the book. And finally, turn the pages, dipping in here and there, reading a paragraph or two, sometimes several pages in sequence. Never more than that. So you thumb through the book in this way. Look for signs of main contentions, look for the main topics, main discussions, and so on and so forth. He says, above all, do not fail to read the last 2 or 3 pages, or if these are an epilogue, the last few pages of the main part of the book. So now that you've skimmed the book systematically, you've done the first activity of inspectional reading. The first activity of inspectional reading. You now have a better idea of what the book is about and whether this book deserves a more detailed read or not. Okay. Adler says here, think of yourself as a detective, looking for clues to a book's general theme or idea. Alert for anything that will make it clearer. Heeding the suggestions we have made will help you sustain this attitude. You will be surprised to find out how much time you will save. Pleased to see how much more you will grasp, and relieved to discover how much easier it all can be than you supposed. So with the first activity of inspectional reading, you're a detective looking for clues, making a sense of the major ideas and themes and topics of the book, trying to figure out, should this book qualify for activity 2 of inspectional reading? Does it deserve a more careful reading, and so on and so forth? This was activity 1 of inspectional reading. Like I said, inspectional reading is divided into 2 steps. So you have activity 1, then you have activity 2, which is superficial reading. Now, activity 1, skimming or pre-reading, should be done in a few minutes and in not more than an hour. Inspectional reading is meant to be timed. It's meant to be activity 2, superficial reading. This should also be done fast. Now, in superficial reading, you're going to read the whole book, but you're going to read it without stopping, without necessarily writing too much on it, without stopping, without trying to stop and understand. You're just going through it. You're just going to speed through it, okay? Because that is going to help the essential topics settle in. And it's going to prepare you for a second deeper reading when you're actually going to read it analytically. Okay, so Adler says, in tackling a difficult book for the first time, read it through without ever stopping to look up or ponder the things you do not understand right away. Pay attention to what you can understand and do not be stopped by what you cannot immediately grasp. Go right on reading past the point where you have difficulties in understanding, and you will soon come to things you do understand. Concentrate on these. Keep on in this way. Read the book through undeterred and undismayed by the paragraphs, footnotes, comments, and references that escape you. Essentially, you're going to speed through the book. You're going to read through the book in a fast way. You're not going to stop. You're not going to look at footnotes and comments and references. You're just going through the book, and you're trying to get a better idea of all of it for the main information in it to settle in, to prepare you for a deeper and more careful reading. Then Adler says, and this is important, most of us were taught to pay attention to the things we did not understand. We were told to go to a dictionary when we met an unfamiliar word. We were told to go to an encyclopedia or some other reference work when we were confronted with allusions or statements we did not comprehend. We were told to consult footnotes, scholarly commentaries, or other secondary sources to get help. But when these things are done prematurely, they only impede our reading instead of helping it. Yes, dictionaries are good, encyclopedias are good, footnotes are good, commentaries are good, secondary sources are good, but you need to use these when the time is right. If you use these prematurely, you have a difficult book that you want to go through, and without getting a complete sense of it through activity 2 of inspectional reading, you're stopping at every point, and you're trying to go deep into the book, you won't be able to do it. Reading it through and through very fast without stopping is going to give you an initial idea of the main topics in the book, and then you can actually read it again. And when you're reading it analytically, that's when you can consult the footnotes and the commentaries and the secondary sources. That would be the time to do it. That is when you can build on your previous reading of the book and increase your understanding and comprehension of the book. Again, we're going to emphasize, use your finger to guide your eyes as you read, and change the speed at which you move your finger for different types of books and even passages within the same book. Adler mentioned this very important principle at the start. We covered it in the previous lesson. You're meant to read things at different speeds. You read different books at different speeds. You read different passages within the same book at different speeds, right? When you use your finger to guide your eyes, and you use your finger also as a way of monitoring your speed, right? You move your fingers across fast when you want to read fast. You move them slower when you want to read slower. When you do it like that, that's when you're able to understand the book properly, right? If you keep the same speed throughout, in most cases, you won't be able to understand the book properly, because you're not giving every passage its due right. Your finger is going to be one of your best aids as you are reading. And of course, important note, inspectional reading is the first step of analytical reading. Okay, you cannot read analytically without inspectional reading. So with that, alhamdulillah, we've now understood how to read inspectionally, how to perform the techniques and the sub activities of inspectional reading, how to successfully inspectionally read a book. Okay. At the end, now that we understood what elementary reading is, what inspectional reading is, I'm going to talk about two main points: how to be a demanding reader, and this is going to put you on the right trajectory, in the right mindset on how to approach books. And this is, of course, a precursor for an analytical reading, right? And at the end, I'm going to mention some general habits that every reader should adopt, whether you're at an elementary stage with your Arabic reading, right? Or whether you want to read Kalila wa Dimna, or any other book that we're going to read in the future, or any other book that you read personally later on in life, right? These habits are going to help you become a better reader, inshallah. So first, we're going to talk about how to be a demanding reader, and then we'll end the session with a discussion on general habits that you should adopt as a reader. From inspectional reading to what we're going to discuss now, all of these are precursors of analytical reading. So how can you be a demanding reader? Step one, ask questions while you read, right? Don't just read in a way that you're just receiving information, you're just trying to remember everything. Yeah, that's important as well, but you need to ask questions along the road while you're reading as well. Questions, and these questions are such that you yourself must try to answer in the course of the reading. What are these questions? Should you be asking any questions? No. There are particular questions which you should be asking. So, what is the book about as a whole? And these are questions you're asking as you are reading. There were some questions you asked before you picked up to read the book, right? That's why you did inspectional reading activity 1 to get an idea about the subject matter of the book and the structure of the book and so on and so forth. Now you're asking questions while you're reading. What is the book about as a whole, right? For example, Kalila wa Dimna, which we're reading, it's a didactic work which aims to teach life lessons. As the story goes, the Indian philosopher wrote it for a tyrant king, so as to teach him the correct ways of ruling a state. Okay, and it comes with life lessons of friendship, dealing with conflict, and so on and so forth. And of course, when we say that you think about this question, what is the book about as a whole, you need to think about the main theme, what the main theme of the book is. So the main idea of Kalila wa Dimna is it's a didactic work which aims to teach life lessons. It's filled with moral lessons. And then you look at the sub-themes within the book, and you think of them in relation to the main theme. That's how you understand what the book is about as a whole. So Kalila wa Dimna is filled with sub-themes: the pursuit of knowledge, the idea of conflict, the idea of friendship, the love of leadership, betrayal, etc. Those are sub-themes that are present in Kalila wa Dimna. The second question you should ask while you're reading is, what is being said in detail and how? So here you're thinking about the main ideas, assertions, and arguments mentioned in the book. Question 3 that you ask is the book true in whole? Or maybe it's true in part, or maybe it's completely false, right? And of course, these two, so with one thing I want to clarify, the first two things, you'll be able to find answers to them even when you read inspectionally. Even when you read inspectionally, you'll be able to answer the first two questions, right? The last two questions, you will only be able to answer them once you've read the book analytically. The last two questions, you will answer them once you've read the book analytically, right? So is the book true in whole or in part? You need to make up your mind after understanding the author's mind about the arguments with which the author is made. And the last question you ask is, what of it? So you ask about the significance of the book. Has it enlightened you? And so on and so forth. Adler says here, the four questions stated above summarize the whole obligation of a reader. Right? So it's very important. These four questions summarize the whole obligation of a reader. They apply to anything worth reading, a book or an article or even an advertisement. Inspectional reading tends to provide more accurate answers to the first two questions than to the last two, but it nevertheless helps with those also. An analytical reading of a book has not been accomplished satisfactorily until you have answers to those last questions, until you have some idea of the book's truth, in whole or part, and of its significance, if only in your own scheme of things. The last question, what of it, is probably the most important one in syntopical reading. Naturally, you will have to answer the first three questions before attempting the final one. So these four questions are the whole obligation of the reader. The first two questions, you'll be able to answer them through inspectional reading. You will gain help through inspectional reading with the other two as well, but you'll be able to answer the third question mainly through analytical reading. And what of it, the last question, is probably the most important question to be answered when you're reading syntopically. When you're reading syntopically. And syntopical reading is the highest level of reading, when you're not just reading, you're not just understanding, but you've read across, you've read a number of things, a number of books, a number of reading material on that subject, and now you're able to develop your own analysis of that subject. So you must ask these questions as you read. This is the first step of becoming a demanding reader, a good reader. And even as you're reading elementarily, you can still ask some of these questions, right, while you're reading the book, to benefit from its contents as you're reading. Step 2 of becoming a demanding reader is make the book your own. Have a pencil with you. As you're trying to read between the lines, please write between the lines as well, as Adler mentions. Underline important things. Make vertical lines at the margin to emphasize important parts. Star or asterisk, important parts. Fold the corner of a page which write numbers of other pages in the margin which might have related information, for example. Circle for emphasis, to emphasize things. Write in the margins. Write in the margins or the top or the bottom of the page. So write in the margins or the top of or the bottom of the page. Outline the book. You can outline the whole book, mentioning its main topics. So make the book your own. Don't feel shy to write on the book. You should be writing on it. Another important thing which Adler mentions is that note making, the notes that you're going to be making on the book, they're essentially going to be of three kinds. There are notes which you make during inspectional reading, right? So it's not like when you're reading inspectionally, you're not writing anything at all. No. When you're reading inspectionally, you do make notes, but you make structural notes. You don't really make conceptual or dialectical notes. You make structural notes. Those type of notes which mainly concern the structure of the book, right? And here Adler recommends that you make such notes on the title page or the contents page of the book. These type of structural notes which have to do with the structure of the book. When you're doing analytical reading, you do conceptual note making. You answer questions regarding the significance of the work and the truth of the work. You might also write down your questions and so on and so forth. And when you're doing syntopical reading, you make conceptual notes, but you also make dialectical notes. And these dialectical notes, these are often made on a separate sheet. They're not really made on a book. The dialectical notes, they're often made on a separate sheet, and they're taken from multiple works. And these dialectical notes, they include the structure of the concepts, order of statements, and questions about that particular subject matter which you're trying to study through syntopical reading. So the dialectical note taking that you take is usually done on a separate piece of paper. The structural and conceptual note taking that you do is usually done on the book itself. But of course, people may have their own preferences in some of these things. Adler sort of compares reading with skiing, right? A lot of you might be thinking that, these are so many steps. How am I supposed to, read and think about these things at the same time, make sure that I'm doing them? So he says that, when you start to learn skiing, right? Skiing is also made up of separate individual acts, right? How your body should be aligned, what you do, what you don't do, and so on and so forth. I've never skied, so I have no idea what particular acts make up the whole act of skiing. But clearly he knew, he did ski at some point. So he says the point about skiing, of course, is that you should not be thinking about the separate acts. Initially, when someone is learning to ski, or take any other example, learning to play football, for example, the coach is teaching them, the trainer is teaching them particular skills. But when they start doing it all together, they're not even thinking about it. They're skiing perfectly without even thinking about those individual acts, but they are performing those individual acts. So he says the point about skiing, of course, is that you should not be thinking about the separate acts that together make a smooth turn or series of linked turns. Instead, you should merely be looking ahead of you down the hill, anticipating bumps and other skiers, enjoying the feel of the cold wind on your cheeks, smiling with pleasure at the fluid grace of your body as you speed down the mountain. In other words, you must learn to forget the separate acts in order to perform all of them. So you must forget the separate acts in order to perform all of them. And this happens, a few times. You're going to perform these individual acts consciously, but then they become second nature to you. You don't even have to worry about performing them. You will be performing them. You have to learn them first as separate acts. Only then can you put them together to become a good skier. Okay? So don't be overwhelmed. Don't think, how am I going to perform all of this while reading, while trying to gain benefit from the book? Yes, a few times, as you're doing them, you'll be learning. Eventually, you'll be able to perform them all together without even thinking about them. Finally, we're going to talk about the general habits of a good reader. Inshallah ta'ala. Now, these habits, they apply to everyone. They apply to everyone. Okay? Step one, and this is based on what Susan Weiss Bauer has mentioned in her book, the Well-Educated Mind. These are some of the things that she recommends. Step one schedule regular reading time. And the general rule is that morning is better than evening. She quotes Thomas Jefferson, who said, there are portions of the day too when the mind should be eased. Thomas Jefferson wrote to his nephew, Thomas Mann Randolph Jr. Particularly after dinner, it should be applied to lighter occupations. Late evening is far from ideal for the project of reading seriously. It is usually far better to spend 30 minutes reading before breakfast than to devote 2 hours to it in the evening. As the autodidact Benjamin Franklin famously suggested, early to bed and early to rise is the most effective path to wisdom. The jury remains out on health and wealth. So this is what she mentions. She's quoted Jefferson. She's paraphrased Franklin as well, Benjamin Franklin as well. But essentially, schedule a regular reading time, and morning is better than evening. Okay, a reader should have a regular reading time in which he is peacefully reading, no noise, no disturbances, no distractions. That's one. Number two, start short. Don't start off with reading 2 hours a day if you're not in the habit of reading. Start short. So you can start with 30 minutes of daily reading. And alhamdulillah, we've picked like in most cases you'll be doing like maximum 3 to 5 pages, and that can be done within 30 minutes to 45 minutes, inshallah ta'ala. There are also going to be breaks, okay, for Kalila wa Dimna. Step 3, take a break. Don't study every day. And likewise, in our reading program, there are breaks. So take a break. You can have a couple of days when you're not studying. Step 4, never check your email before you start reading. It's a distraction. Now she mentions email, but this applies to anything that can be a source of distraction for you. Could be your phone, could be your WhatsApp, your Facebook, anything that's going to be a distraction for you. Don't check it before you start reading. And finally, which is very important, keep a journal. I've mentioned this in the reading guide as well. Keep a journal for jotting down notes, for writing brief summaries. Susan Bauer says, write the title of the chapter on the first page of your notebook. So your journal. Read through the entire chapter once without stopping. If any particular ideas, phrases, or sentences strike you, go ahead and jot them down. Then summarize. Then she says, when you've done this for the entire chapter, glance back over your summary paragraphs. Now write down your reactions to this information in each summary. Use the margins of your paper for this. A different pen color is also helpful. So these 5 tips, they're not really steps, they're more of tips. But these are generally good habits to have as a reader. Schedule a regular reading time. Start with start short, take breaks. Don't do anything that's going to distract you before reading, and keep a journal as well. I've recommended keeping 2 types of journals, one for phrase mining and word mining, the other for writing down your thoughts as you're reading Kalila wa Dimna. So in today's session, alhamdulillah, we've talked about elementary reading. We've talked about inspectional reading, how you can read inspectionally. We've talked about how to become a demanding reader. And becoming a demanding reader has to be with preparing yourself for analytical reading. And of course, at the end, we've mentioned some general tips for any reader which they can find beneficial. I really want the students who have joined the ALP, the Arabic Literature Program, to see where they fit in, right? Do they fit? I think a lot of us might fit in at stage 3, at stage 4. Some of us might be beyond that, but your reading goal needs to be based on that. right? If you're at stage 3, one of your main goals should be vocabulary building, to learn how to unlock meaning through context, and so on and so forth. If you're at stage 4 of elementary reading, your aim should be to refine and enhance your previous skills. If you're beyond that, you really need to attend the next session, learn the art of analytical reading, and apply those techniques to Kalila wa Dimna. As I said, this course, inshallah ta'ala, is for everyone, and everyone can benefit from it. I've shared resources for beginners. I've shared resources for others as well, inshallah ta'ala. With that, we're going to end today's session. Barakallahu fikum for attending. Assalamu alaikum.